إنه كان عبدا شكورا. وقضينا إلى بني إسرائيل في الكتاب لتفسدن في الأرض مرتين ولتعلن علوا كبيرا. فإذا جاء وعد أولاهما بعثنا عليكم عبادا لنا أولي بأس شديد فجاسوا خلال الديار وكان وعدا مفعولا. ثم رددنا لكم الكرة عليهم وأمددناكم بأموال وبنين وجعلناكم أكثر نفيرا. إن أحسنتم أحسنتم لأنفسكم وإن أسأتم فلها. فإذا جاء وعد الآخرة ليسوءوا وجوهكم وليدخلوا المسجد كما دخلوه أول مرة وليتبروا ما علوا تتبيرا. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to our Thursday night program. I would just want to remind everyone about our Arba'in walk this Saturday, 6:30. Just make sure you be here on time to start the walk, and then we have English lecture and Arabic lecture on that night as well. Also, the IMI, the Imamiya Medics International, are going to be here. They're going to be doing some routine health screening and some first aid stuff. So please make sure you bring your family as well. I guess without further delay, please help me welcome Samahat Sheikh Abdulrahman Cherri with a loud salat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Respected brothers and sisters, Thursday night is one of those nights which have been mentioned in the ahadith to have a very important significance in a Muslim's life. Now, as we know, there is a calendar that is considered to be the Gregorian calendar that we go with. And then we have a lunar calendar, which is a calendar which follows the movement of the moon. The Gregorian relies on the sun. But there's also something that's called a spiritual calendar. It's a calendar that revolves around the spiritual benefits and spiritual effects, the connection between the spiritual world and the physical world. And in this calendar, we have certain days that have more benefits or effects that differ from the other days. So Thursday night is a night where prayers are more answered. There's more activity that occurs between the spiritual world and the physical world. Friday is also a very sacred day. That's why the Friday prayers was prescribed upon the Prophet ﷺ and therefore prescribed upon the Muslims, because on this special day, there's also a certain type of activity that occurs between the physical world and the spiritual world that doesn't occur on other days. Now, how do we come to know this? It's because the Prophet ﷺ, through his spiritual journey, through perfecting himself spiritually, through connecting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through becoming who he is, the final messenger and the greatest of all creations, as we Muslims believe, he was able to remove the veils that are between the physical world and the spiritual world. And a lot of people are able to remove these veils. Every individual, if you purify yourself, if you undergo spiritual exercises, if you go against your animalistic self, you fight against your desires, you fight against your physical desires and passions, you're able to become more spiritually inclined. And when I refer to that, I'm not referring to becoming in a good mood only, or feeling happy or joyful all the time, or feeling at peace all the time. That's an effect of being spiritual, but that's at a much lower level. What happens when a believer begins to get closer to God through their prayers, and not just performing the salat in a normal way, no, performing a sincere type of prayer, connecting to God, removing those veils that are between the person and God, the person is able to start seeing things that they were not able to see before. In a hadith that we have, the Prophet ﷺ talks about, or talks to the mu'mineen, the believers, and he tells them, if it wasn't for the devils or the satans that are revolving around your hearts, your souls, then you would have seen what I see and you would have heard what I hear. But there are things that prevent us. When you're too inclined to the physical world, this is what you see. You use your two eyes that are on your face, and you only see the physical reality. That's why in another hadith, Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam says that every person has two eyes, or two pairs of eyes. The pair of eyes that he sees the dunya with, and then he has two eyes in his heart, in his soul. And through that he is able to see the akhirah, or the spiritual world. But those need to be revealed. The veils have to be lifted. So the Prophet, through his spiritual exercise and his detachment from this world and his connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that journey that he undertook, where when he became 40, Gabriel descended onto him and brought the message to him. He's able to see angels now, to hear angels. Angels are part of the spiritual world. They're not part of the physical world. That's why we cannot see them. So they're part of the other realm. But because the Prophet's soul became so powerful and strong, that veil was removed, and so he was able to communicate with that being. He was able to see and be present in that world all the time. So through this presence, through this removal of the veils, the Prophet was able to see that on the day of Friday, there is more spiritual activity that occurs. More angels descend onto the earth. On Thursday night, the same thing is also true. On certain days of the year, like the night of Al-Qadr, the night of destiny, the Prophet told us that on this night, according to some of the narrations, what happens for the next year is prescribed for you. Of course, not with a permanent marker, right? You can change some of that stuff. But in general, the point or the state that you're in on that night, whatever is for the next year is prescribed on that night. And the Prophet knew that because he was able to see this reality. He wasn't just guessing, or he wasn't just told. He was witnessing what was occurring in the other realm on this night. And so out of the blessings and kindness and mercy that he has, he shared this with us as believers and those followers of his. So Thursday night is one of those nights that the Prophet and the Imams told us to pay close attention to. Because if you do things on this night, you do dua, supplications, prayers, you recite Quran, any good deed that you do is multiplied on this night. So one of those things that we have, and a treasure that we have, is the supplication that we recite every Thursday night, which is named Dua Kumail, the supplication of Kumail. Kumail was an individual who Imam Ali alayhi salam taught this prayer to. We have this narrated from him, and the Imam says that Al-Khidr is a very mysterious personality. He's mentioned in the Quran, but whenever he's brought up, it's as if he was the one who carries all these spiritual secrets, and he used to teach them to the prophets and the Imams. Some individuals or scholars say that Al-Khidr was a prophet himself. And in some narrations, we have that the prophet Khidr is a being like Isa alayhi salam, like Jesus. He doesn't die. Until now, he's alive. Of course, on the Day of Judgment, everybody will end at that point. But he has lived for many, many years. So he transmitted this dua to the Imam, and the Imam in turn taught it to Kumail. And we received it. And it's one of the most beautiful supplications any person can read. So what I thought we can do tonight, based on a few lectures that we've had before, is to spend some time to contemplate over this dua. The idea is not just to recite the dua and make movements and sounds from our mouths. It's very important that when we're talking to God, we're very well aware of what we are saying to him. We're communicating with him. You know, when you're sitting down with your friends and someone's like, chatting on the phone and you're having conversation with them, and you say something and you're really interested in this topic that you're talking about, and it's something that's very important to you, but your friend's busy on their phone, they're not paying that attention to you, right? Once you finish the sentence, they'll respond with something that's very summarized or simple, like, yeah, I get what you mean. Oh man, that's terrible, because he heard one bad incident in the conversation, like you're talking and you said the word fell. So he assumes I gotta say, oh, that's terrible, right? So this type of communication is not valuable communication. It's not something you would say that, is has a type of value and appreciation when you're talking to the other person. When you're speaking with someone, especially when a parent is speaking to a child or a child to a parent, you have to give them your full attention. A child notices and realizes when their parent is not paying attention to them. And it happens in a lot of families. The child comes to the parent talking about something, and the parent is busy with their phone or watching something, and they try to dismiss the child. But that child is speaking their heart out. To them, what they're saying is very important, and they want to be given that attention. And they feel it. When they grow up, every child remembers. We've grown up, and we can remember our childhood. Everybody can remember if their parents gave them that attention or not. Everybody knows that when I was a child and one day I came to my mom or dad and I said so and so and so, and they just brushed me off, right? These things stay in the mind and the heart of a child. So you have to pay attention to this type of behavior. You might not think it's very important. You think it's just a kid, right? What do they know? What are they going to remember? But we were kids once, and a lot of our memories should teach us, if we think about them, if we practice contemplation over our lives, we should understand that when we were at that age, there are certain memories that remain with us. Some we forget about, yes, but there are ones that we don't forget about. So the children that we have are experiencing that same thing. And even nowadays, it's much more difficult to maintain that attention for the children because of all the distractions that we have. The same thing applies to reciting du'as, that supplications. We don't want to be talking to Allah having that distraction in our mind. We don't want to just be speaking to him with making sounds or uttering sounds like something that's generic or something that's repetitive, right? We're supposed to speak to him as if we are emptying our hearts out to Him. One way to help us do that is to contemplate over the words that we're using. Now, there are different types of prayers. One time, you're walking down the road and you drop your phone, or you drop your purse, or you drop something. And then you talk to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that moment. Ya Allah, why did this happen to me? Or Ya Allah, don't make this day bad for me, right? That's the type of prayer. That usually comes out in the moment, and it comes out from the heart usually. That has its own purpose. There are other prayers that have different purposes. So you might say to yourself, why should I read Dua Qumail? Why don't I just pray my own prayer? Why don't I just invent my own prayer, right? This is a question that we have. So it's not wrong to invent your own prayers for your own needs. But you shouldn't always rely on your own invention of prayers. Why? Because most of the time, we don't wish for the best for ourselves. In the moment, you have a certain desire in your heart. You think that what you're asking for is the best thing for you. Like if you're in the teenage and your parents, tell you, build a connection with God, go pray in the room, talk to God. You sit down on the prayer mat and you say, oh Allah, I ask you from the bottom of my heart, let my dad buy me a PS5, right? That's the kind of dua. Why? Because that's a need you feel that you have at that moment. That's what makes you happy in life. You think that the world revolves around this. Yes, it might satisfy a certain need for you. And it's not a bad thing to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for anything that you want. It's not a bad thing. But we shouldn't always make all our supplications and demands and prayers from Allah based on our own whims and desires. Sometimes we ask for things that are not good for us. In the bigger picture or in the long run, what we ask for might harm us. You might apply for a job and you pray from the bottom of your heart, oh Allah, give me this job. And if He does give it to you, you wish that, I wish I never got this job, right? Or if you're young and you fall in love with someone, and that's it. You say, Allah, give me this girl, or this girl says, give me that guy. That's it. I don't want to marry anyone else, right? And you're busy with all those emotions and feelings of romance and love, and especially if it's a first love. There you don't see anything in front of you. This person is everything, right? But then, God knows that in the future, this individual, if you were a bit more mature and you're a bit more aware of what's important in life, that this person is not suitable for you. Right now, you're not thinking with your mind. Or, even if you're thinking with your mind, you don't see a certain thing in their characteristic that Allah knows. So Allah is not going to answer every prayer that you ask for out of His kindness and mercy. Sometimes He gives us things even if they harm us, because we asked for them, but we learn from those things. So sometimes Allah says, if I don't give you this thing, this person's never going to learn how to change. So He might give that thing, and then you figure it out on your own, because you have to know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is more knowledgeable than you. This is in one of the ahadith or sayings in Nahj al-Balagha. Imam Ali alayhi salam is narrated to have said that I knew Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or I came to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the change of plans and the breaking of promises, or not promises, breaking of things that I've intended to do. Naqdul himam. So I plan to do something, I plan to go to a park, I plan to travel somewhere, and my plans get ruined. Imam Ali alayhi salam says, I knew Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I come to know about Him when my plans get ruined. Why? Because I learn that I'm not the one who controls my own destiny. I'm not the one who knows what's best for me all the time. There's always a bigger planner than I. So He takes these circumstances which seem to be difficult and hard on the outside to tolerate, and uses it to benefit His knowledge for Allah, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you plan something and it doesn't work out for you, the Imam says this teaches you that Allah is there. It reminds you of Allah watching over you. So there are things that we do in life that might not be for our own good, and Allah removes those from us, or protects us from falling into those problems. Now when it comes to the du'as that the Imams have written, because the Imams were more excelled spiritually, because the Imams were more advanced spiritually, they're able to see things that we cannot see. So a parent, when they grow up and their children are young and they want that PlayStation or they want that, gaming computer and whatnot, the parent knows that if their child spends their whole time gaming from morning to night, that they're not going to succeed in life. They're not going to have a good life. They're not going to be able to find a job. They're not going to be able to have a career because they're not studying. They're not spending their time in what's important for them, for their future. Now, how does the parent know this? Well, because the parent went through the trials of life, right? They advanced. They moved forward. They went through the trials. They've experienced that childhood, that teenagehood. They've experienced the 20s and the 30s. So here, from this experience and awareness, the parents are able to protect this child and teach them and guide them where to go. The same thing applies spiritually. The Imams are those individuals who have matured spiritually much more than we have. They've detached themselves from this dunya. They've seen the true reality of this world. So when they write a dua for us, they teach us exactly what to ask for. They teach us and tell us what is it in the speech with God that you have to say or talk about, because this is what's preventing you from moving forward. This is what's preventing you from reaching that high status. You might think it's a problem, but the Imam redirects your attention to another problem, which is a real problem. And one example of this is dua kumail. Of course, it's a very long dua, and we won't be able to go through it because of the shortage of time. But this is a nice series if somebody ever here wants to go through a series or read the dua and contemplate over it. It's very beautiful to spend some time, since you're coming here every Thursday night, to open the dua and read it not as a prayer or supplication. Read it with the intention of seeking knowledge. Not every dua you have to read with the intention of it being a supplication. You can pick up dua kumail and say, today I'm going to decide to read this as a study. I'm going to study it. My intention is to seek knowledge. So you begin dissecting word by word. So when we look at the dua, I'm going to go through a few sections here, just to kind of give you a few ideas and a few hints as to how to go about doing this. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So I'll begin with this section. Allahumma aghfir li al-dhunub allati tahtiku al-isam. O God, or O Allah, forgive me the sins that destroy or remove the protection. Now, the name Allah was used. The Imam says Allahumma. Allahumma means Ya Allah. The Imam could have used any other name of God, right? Why didn't he say Ya Rahman or Ya Ghafoor اغفر لي الذنوب التي تهتك العصا? Why did he say Allahumma? The name Allah in Islamic understanding is that name which they refer to as the all-comprehensive name, meaning that all the other names are included inside of it. When you say Allah, it means it includes Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, Al-Ghafoor, Al-Qahar. The infinite names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are included in that. So when you say Allah, you're invoking all the names. And in other situations, you can use different names of Allah. You can say Ya Rahman, Ya Arham Ar-Rahimin, right? Ya Asma' As-Sami'in, depending on what you're asking for. So when you say Allah, or the Imam tells us to say Allahumma, he's teaching us that in this situation, you're invoking all of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's names. You're referring to a very general type of asking. Allahumma aghfir li al-dhunub allati tahtiku al-isam. Oh Allah, forgive me the sins. Dhunub means sins. And ghufran, before that, means forgiveness. In the language, in Arabic, linguistically, ghufran refers to concealing. To say ghafar al-shay is to conceal it. So when you say Allah ighfir li al-dhunub, is to conceal my sins or remove my sins. Now there's a lot that I wanted to mention, but I'm not going to be able to go through these, so I'm going to skip some parts and I'm going to focus on certain sections which I think are more important. When you talk about sins, ighfir li al-dhunub, which kind of sins are you referring to? We have general sins, which include all types of sins, and then we have specific sins. So here the Imam is telling us that there is a type of sins that removes a form of protection that we have. الذنوب التي تهتك العصم. Not every sin has the same effect as the other sin. Some sins remove that spiritual protection that you have. Sometimes you want to commit a wrong thing, but there's something that stops you from doing it, something that protects you from falling when you're in a very difficult situation in life. This is because there's a certain sin that you have not committed in your life. You're still protected by the spiritual protection. But there are things that you may do in life that will remove this protection from you. التي تهتك العصم. Ism here is that protection. You've all heard of the word asma, right? Ma'soom, the infallible. Ma'soom is the person who is protected from committing sins. So ism here are those protections that we have. When we look at the Quran, we see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when describing the story of Nabi Nuh alayhi salam, all of you must have heard of the story of Nabi Nuh. وَأُوحِيَ إِلَى نُوحٍ أَنَّهُ لَن يُؤْمِنَ مِنْ قَوْمِكَ إِلَّا مَنْ قَدْ آمَنَ فَلَا تَبْتَئِسْ بِمَا كَانُوا يَفْعَلُونَ. It was revealed to Noah, none of your people will believe except those who already have faith. So do not lament. You know, Nabi Nuh alayhi salam spent hundreds of years between his people trying to guide them. And the individuals were not listening to him. Only a few people believed in his message. Over 700 years, Nabi Nuh alayhi salam lived amongst his people, and still they did not listen to him. So God had ordered him to build this ship, and as he was building it, they began to make fun of him. They're looking at this crazy person. He's building a ship for what? What is he trying to do? They accuse him of insanity, right? وَاصْنَعِ الْفُلْكَ بِأَعْيُنِنَا وَوَحْيِنَا وَلَا تُخَاطِبْنِي فِي الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا إِنَّهُمْ مُغْرَقُونَ. God tells Noah alayhi salam, build the ark before our eyes as I'm watching you, and by our revelation, and do not plead with me for those who are wrongdoers. They shall indeed be drowned. He says, don't worry about these person who are wrongdoers. They don't know what's going to happen in a little bit. Once you finish this, and you're on the ship with those believers, and that rain comes down and the flood begins to come, at that moment, they're going to know what wrong they have committed. وَيَصْنَعُ الْفُلْكَ وَكُلَّمَا مَرَّ عَلَيْهِ مَلَأٌ مِّنْ قَوْمِهِ سَخِرُوا مِنْهُ قَالَ إِن تَسْخَرُوا مِنَّا فَإِنَّا نَسْخَرُ مِنْكُمْ كَمَا تَسْخَرُونَ. As he was building the ark, whenever the elders of his people passed by him, they would ridicule him. They used to make fun of him. He said, if you ridicule us, we shall ridicule you just as you ridicule us. And Nuh alayhi salam is referring to the future event. That you don't know that there's going to come that day when we're going to be saved and our places are going to be exchanged. We're going to be the ones who look at you and look down at you because of the wrong that you have done. You can make fun of us now. You can laugh at us now. But you don't see what we see. And this is how a believer is supposed to be. In our ahadith, al-mu'minu yanzuru bi'ayni Allah. The believer looks with the eyes or the vision of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're able to see things and through things that a non-believer is not able to see. So as he was building the ship, he completes it, and then he is ordered, حتى إذا جاء أمرنا وفارت التنور قلنا احمل فيها من كل زوجين اثنين وأهلك إلا من سبق عليه القول ومن آمن وما آمن معه إلا قليل. When our edict came and the oven gushed, this is how the Arabic describes the situation. That water that came down, the ayah, the verse says that this water came from a place like an oven. It gushed out. It must have had some heat or something that allowed the release of this water from the ground, and the flood began to happen. وَفَارَ التَّنُّورُ قُلْ نَحْمِلْ فِيهَا مِنْ كُلِّ زَوْجَيْنِ. We said, carry in it a pair of every kind, along with your family, except those against whom the edict has already been given, and those who have faith. So the Prophet was ordered to carry his family and the believers as well. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and none believed with him except a few. He said there's an exception to your family, and that was his wife. Nabi Nuh alayhi salam's wife was a disobedient wife. She disobeyed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and she was not amongst the believers. So he was commanded to leave her behind. Then, وَقَالُوا ارْكَبُوا فِيهَا بِسْمِ اللَّهِ مَجْرَاهَا وَمُرْسَاهَا إِنَّ رَبِّي لَغَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ. He said, board it. In the name of Allah, it shall set sail and cast anchor. Indeed, my Lord is all forgiving and all merciful. After the water comes, the ship goes, and the people are saved. Nabi Nuh alayhi salam, before that, he remembers someone that is not on the ship with them. He remembers his son. وهي تجري بهم في موج كالجبال ونادى دوح ابنه وكان في معزل يا بني اركب معنا ولا تكن مع الكافرين. And it sailed along with them amid waves like mountains. That's how big the waves were. They were as big as mountains. Nuh alayhi salam called out to his son, who stood aloof, "O my son, board with us, and do not be with the faithless." His son didn't want to go on the ship with him. So he decided to stay behind, and he responded to his father, Nabi Nuh alayhi salam, by saying, قَالَ سَآوِي إِلَى جَبَلٍ يَعْصِمُنِي مِنَ الْمَاءِ قَالَ لَا عَاصِمَ الْيَوْمَ مِنْ أَمْرِ اللَّهِ إِلَّا مَنْ رَحِمَ وَحَالَ بَيْنَهُمَا الْمَوْجُ فَكَانَ مِنَ الْمُغْرَقِينَ. He said, I shall take refuge on a mountain. It will protect me from the flood. Hear the word, protection. يعصمني قال سآوي إلى جبل يعصمني اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تهتك العصم. A person might think, without Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's protection, that they are able to protect themselves. Their ego is so big, they're so self-centric, that they think that nothing can stop them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not able to defeat them. I can take care of myself. There's water, there's waves, there's a flood that's coming. It's very easy. I'll climb up a mountain, and it's not possible that the water will be so much that it's going to cover the mountains as well. So he relied on himself over here. It will protect me from the flood. He said, Nuh alayhi salam responds to him, there is none today who can protect from Allah's edict except someone upon whom he has mercy. Then the waves came between them, and he was among those who were drowned. So as he was speaking to his son, the waves came and took his son away, and he drowned in the water. So here, when we talk about this and we read this supplication, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us those sins that make us think that we are self-dependent or we're independent from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Those sins that make us think that we are the ones who are running the show in our lives. There are sins that blind you. A person doesn't wake up in the morning becoming an arrogant individual. This is something that occurs gradually. There are things that we commit in our lives that make us the example of the son of Nuh alayhi salam. He might have been a good person at the beginning, but he must have committed something in his life that made him reach this point of self-arrogance, where he thought that nothing can drown me. All I have to do is I can go on the mountain and protect myself. A storm might come, some calamity might happen in your life, and if you rely on yourself 100% without understanding that there are things that are outside of your hand, then you are someone who has lost that vision. You have lost the ability to understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is able to protect you from certain things that occur in your life. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. According to a narration of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, he says that sins that destroy protection, isma, are the following. Number one, drinking alcohol. If you drink alcohol, you lose that protection, that isma. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala removes it from you. It destroys you both spiritually and physically as well, and mentally. If you drink alcohol, you're unable to see what's good for you and what's bad for you. You're in a bad situation, you're depressed, you're feeling down. You resort to drinking alcohol, let's say, or consuming certain types of drugs. This blinds you from being able to make correct decisions. And if you lose your mind, you lose your intellect, then the decision that you're going to make is probably going to be one that harms you. So drinking alcohol removes that ability for you to protect yourself by nature. This is one sin that the Imam says removes this protection from us. Inshallah, in our community, we don't have people that are afflicted with this. Spiritually, alcohol also destroys you. If you drink, in our hadith, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not accept your prayer for 40 days. Of course, that doesn't mean that you should not pray. You still have to pray. But there's a difference between a prayer that you do out of obligation, a prayer that is fulfilled, and an accepted prayer. We have a fulfilled prayer, and you have to do that no matter what. And then we have an accepted prayer, the one that has a spiritual effect on you, that one that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts from you. If you drink for 40 days, your salat is not accepted. So mentally it has an effect on you, and spiritually it has an effect on you. The other sin that the Imam mentions in the hadith that removes this protection is gambling. If you gamble, that's removed from you. That divine protection is removed. Another sin is engaging in actions that make people laugh in mockery and amusement. You behave in a very foolish way. You mock people. You put them down. You insult them. You make racist remarks. This type of behavior removes that spiritual protection from you. Another sin, mentioning the faults of others. If you talk about people behind their back about their faults, you backbite them. If you always focus on criticizing individuals, this removes that spiritual protection from you. That allows you or makes you fall into deeper and deeper problems in your life. One day you might feel okay and everything is working out for you. You go and you talk about people behind their back. You backbite someone. The next day, it's as if the whole world has changed. You become a different person because that protection has been removed. This is one of the sins that removes that protection that you have. Mentioning the faults of others. Another sin that the Imam mentions, associating with people who are suspicious, meaning they're wrongdoers. You hang out with the wrong crowd. You hang out with people who are sinners and don't want to change, people that harm you. Being around those individuals causes this protection to be moved away as well. So if you want to be protected from wrong things happening in your life, if you want that divine protection to remain on you, then you have to avoid these types of sins. And when you read the dua, Allahumma ghfir li al-dunub allati tahtiku al-isam, you ask Allah to forgive all of these sins that we've committed that remove this protection from us. All of us, fall into the trap of backbiting and talking about others and describing their faults. So this is something we have to ask for forgiveness for, because that speaking of other people in a bad way could ruin our lives. So every Thursday we come, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive those sins that remove this protection from us that we've committed throughout the week. I'm going to end here because it's prayer time. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa ala alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin.